Excuse me.
My name is Janine Pavlidis. I work as interim assistant chancellor in the assistant office for special projects. This is one of them. Before I start talking for a few minutes, I'd like to pause and Dr. Long say a few words to reflect on the last few days.
A moment like this has been over the last few days in both our national and international history, reminds us of the utter contingency of human existence and its frailty. And I'm sure that in addition to all of the emotions, sadness, anxiety, fear, and disillusionment and rage, I think all of us in some measure are also painfully, profoundly aware of that contingency and of the vulnerability of human existence. Also, I think we're aware of the intricate, what Abraham Lincoln called the mystic ties among human beings. And so I would invite you to join with me and stand for a moment, simply a moment of silence. Thank you very much.
The order of events today, you have an agenda, and several sheets of paper over there if you have not brought some that were numerous emails sent out. What I'd like to do is to give you a little bit of background about where these competencies or the call for competencies came from, try to put it in perspective for you, and try to take no longer than up to 10 minutes to do so. I then will pass it off to our two task force chairs. Dr. John Presley is the chair of the task force on writing, and Dr. Ron Davis is the chair of the task force on technology. And we have two different task forces that have been meeting. Actually, we've only met twice, so the plans that you do have in your hands are draft plans, and we have been taking them out to our sister colleges for comment. Let me begin by saying that the call for competencies came from the State Council of Higher Education. Prior to that call, the governor had tasked a task force called the Blue Ribbon Commission on Higher Education. And I'm going to pass this around so you can just hold it, look through it if you'd like while we're going through this afternoon's sessions. But in it, it called for a whole slew of recommendations on higher education. Some of these recommendations pointed to a need to have some kind of testing of general ed. And frankly, that task force or that commission wanted to see some type of testing, similar to the SOLs, if you will, of K-12. Your college presidents did a remarkable job making sure that did not happen. And that's a good thing. But what we're left with is a need to respond to some of these outcomes assessment pieces that they've asked for. And that's what we're grappling with. We need to respond to it. It's not like we cannot do it. So I guess what's not on the table today is why do we have to do this thing anyways? I think we do. And we do need to do it in such a way that will, I think, be meaningful to us. I'm going to pass this around, and you'll see that there are probably 70 or 80 recommendations. From the work of the Blue Ribbon Commission, they looked at general education, and since they couldn't win out on testing, they did look at 6 competencies that they wanted Shev to ask, if you will, or require the institutions of higher education to react to. The 2 that you have in front of you today include writing and technology. The good news is we are asked to define it ourselves, to say what that definition will be, to tell the state what our standards are, to tell the state how we will assess those standards, and to report at an aggregate level, meaning at a system level. We would not be reporting any of this data at the college level, the faculty level, or the student level. Okay, so really the whole idea is to respond to this request. And what I'd like to show you is a report of institutional effectiveness. And several of the people in this room were on the committee a year or so ago that helped to develop that report. You know, Ivy was on it, I think Fran, Blythe, I'm not sure if there were a couple other members here that were on that committee. And what that committee was asked to do was to help respond to the first round of reporting. And the word effectiveness here is not to be confused with how the state, the SACS refers to effectiveness. It is really, truly an efficiency report. Let me show that to you. And you can each go on to the State Council's homepage. This is not the system's homepage. It is their homepage. You'll see a little ribbon called ROIE in the corner. And I'm clicking on that. It brings you to their piece of the homepage called Reports of Institutional Effectiveness. Okay. You can go directly to the reports. Their intent was for people in the public, whether it were parents or policymakers or students, to go onto these websites and find out some information about the public institutions of Virginia. Four-year institutions had to respond to 14 system-wide measures. We as a system had to do the same thing, although the council agreed to some changes. Just give you one example. All of the four-year institutions have to report on fall retention. Student retention to a community college doesn't mean a lot, and we know that. So what we asked for was a measure called student advancement, which captured more holistically the movement of a student from one year to the next. Included our transfer students, included students who retained and stayed with us, students who also, I guess, completed. So our picture looked different, and the council allowed us to do that, which was probably a very good thing. On every one of these pages, you will see a similar profile. There's a profile that describes us. Click on that and get into the, again, none of this we supplied the State Council. They have this huge database that they can tap into as a coordinating agency. And this just gives some statistics about who we are, our students, resources, and so forth. And all of higher ed has this. The system-wide measures are the 14 measures that everyone needed to respond to. I'm going to move down quickly. For example, faculty productivity. This definition, for the most part, is the same definition across higher education. At the bottom, we have some institution-specific measures, which really are specific to a community college in Virginia. We're using such things as some workforce development measures, how many jobs, etc. What else do we have here? I think we have a transfer rate of how many students move from our colleges to the four-year institutions, that type of thing. My reason for showing you this website is that the competencies will be on this homepage. There will be another measure that's probably student outcome. I'm not sure exactly how the council will tack this onto the homepage, but it will be there. And if you look at the document on page 10 of that rather thick document that you received, there's additional copies on the table, is a template of how the competencies may look. It's an example, okay, of how this might look. What I'm trying to dispel is the notion that every one of our colleges will be listed separately, because they will not. And on page 10, you'll see a template. that asks for the definition, the standard, the assessment, and then essentially a statistic, percentage of students who are rated highly competent, or less than competent. We decide what that means. That's why we're here, because we need your help in understanding how best to carry out and define what does it mean we mean by writing. Are we talking just two-year graduates, for example? What does it mean, do we mean by technology, or in this case, information literacy? I think I've given you most of the points that I've wanted to make. That is something that we have to do. If we're going to do this, is try to learn something from it. Anything that you do at the college level should be to improve programs, improve learning. But frankly, what we'll report here will be a statistic for the system. All right, let me stop here because I don't want to take up too much time. Is there anything else I want to? Let me turn this over to Dr. Presley, who's going to talk a little bit about the assumptions and the key points of the writing technology, or the writing plan.
I used to teach English, and I still do occasionally and enjoy doing it. I wanted to get up and say something because of my friend Earl Simpson in the back and say, I'm just getting up here to split an infinitive. I'd like to introduce two members of the committee that are here today that have been working on the writing competencies. Dr. James O'Brien, a professor of psychology at Tidewater Community College, responding later, and Tom Long, Dr. Tom Long, a professor of English at Thomas Nelson Community College. Various members of the committee are going to the various sites, and so pleased to have them with us today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say how much I've appreciated the yeoman work that Linda Carr and Janine Leas at the Assistant's Office have done. And as a dean of instruction at a college that has limited resources, and knowing that every one of you have institutions without the resources to do all that we need to do, this is one time that we're very fortunate to be able to report as a system and to have the system working as an aggregate rather than having to do this as individual institutions. So because I know the amount of time that Janine and Linda have spent on this, and I'm not afraid of them if they scold me later, and that John would join me, let's thank them for all the work that they're doing. I'm not going to talk long. One of the things that I want to talk about briefly is how we got to where we got, so that your input today will be helpful to us. And sometimes I get confused, and I think I've got what this is about, and then other times it seems to slip away. And when that happens, I read this sentence about the competency assessment plans, and it's from the State Council. Our purpose in the competency assessment effort is to demonstrate institutional effectiveness, and by institutional effectiveness, the Virginia Community College system, not Germanna Community College or Rappahannock Community College, the institutional effectiveness, rather than to guarantee or certify competencies for individual graduates. When I have an anxiety attack, I read that sentence and then I feel better. But anyway, what everyone can do in this troubled world to cut down anxiety, we need to do it, and that one helps me with this. We've had we've had 2 meetings of the whole committee. We've had a meeting of the subcommittee. The folks have worked long and hard. We have communicated by email, and I edit my file a lot, and this is the latest unedited, unduplicated version. And we're trying to come to consensus for something that will work for everyone, knowing that the right plan for each individual institution won't happen. We're trying to come up with something that will be palatable for everyone and let the individual institutions then move further if they wish to do so. Just briefly to review a couple of points in the draft plan. Because I'm an English teacher, and for the English teachers in this room who should say amen, let's look at assumption B. Writing in courses other than English is essential and competence in writing should be the responsibility of faculty throughout the college, not solely the responsibility of the English faculty. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay. We're also looking at assumption E. We're assuming that students coming into English 111, and we'll get to how we picked that course in just a minute, and know that some of you will want to talk to us about that. We're assuming that the students are proficient with writing mechanics after completing high school, or the students without these skills are testing into developmental courses through system-wide English placement standards. Now, we've tried to balance, and it's been a tough balance, between a pragmatic approach, because we have to do this. It's not optional. There's no need to take a vote on whether we're going to do it or not, because it's simply not a possibility. We must do it. And we wanted to also pay some attention to the ideal and be sure that since we were having to do it, something could come of it that would be useful for the improvement of writing, which is one of the most important skills any of our students can lead with. Now, if we look at the recommendations, this task force has talked at length in person and through email about which course we should start with. The logic for starting with English 111 has to do with the number of students that are in that class, the fact that we do not have to do a value-added approach. We know that there are many better ways to do this, but for the practical approach, the number of students placed in 111, and we've had placement testing, will give us the kind of sample that should be acceptable to the State Council. But we look forward later, when you have the opportunity to respond, to hear your reactions to that. Recommendation B, and remember this is a pilot year. What we're doing now is not for hereafter a world without end. There will probably be a lot that we learn from this in ways that we can make improvements. We also hope to use the expertise of the English peer groups with what we've learned from this to talk to us about better and different ways to capture this data in the future. Now, if you would look at the draft plan for writing assessment, the definition of writing competency, we're emphasizing content, style, and mechanics. We have to report in 3 categories, and you can see that in your documents. And Janine, I think, alluded to how the report is going to look on the State Council webpage. Highly competent, the writing will be judged as highly competent, competent, or less than competent. Now, that's one I lost on, because you know the new thing they have about if you're evaluating, classify people contributor, less than contributor, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious contributor, but the tough committee wouldn't go with that. So anyway, we'll be judging the writing in those 3 general categories. Now, we should have a moment of silence before I begin to talk about a random sample. But I've got notes, and if I get it wrong, Newell Glennon can help me with this, because I know she knows statistics. I'm the only person, I think, who graduated from the University of Virginia without having to take the 2nd statistics course. They all decided that the faculty would live longer, and I would live longer, and everybody would be happy, and the world wouldn't come to an end if I didn't take my 2nd statistics course. So I'm really quoting Earl Hewitt, who's been a great help on this. Here goes what I know about a true random sample, and I'm going to read. This fall, approximately 11,444 students in the community college system will be program-placed students enrolled in English 111. This does not include dual enrollment students. It does not include, it doesn't include dual enrollment students. They have to be program-placed. Okay, 11,444. We're proposing that we do a 5% random sample. That random sample will be generated at the systems office. A 5% random sample of 11,444 will result in 588 student names being generated. This is a standard statistical sample which is acceptable to the State Council on Higher Education. We had some lengthy conversations about how perhaps we could do a 10% random sample. But that really becomes undoable with the practical aspects we have going now. And so I hope nobody will be passionate about moving up beyond the 5% because we simply have to get the work done, and if 5% is acceptable, so be it. If you look at the top of page 4, here's one that Dr. Long may help me with, or Dr. O'Brien. One of the things that we're going to have to be working on with you and with the Deans of Instruction at the upcoming Deans meeting are the specific details of how this is going to happen. Now, English teachers are God's gift to a troubled world, but we teach differently. There are very different ways to teaching, to achieving effective writing. For example, my approach to teaching writing does not use the modes of discourse. I think that content should be the driving force. Another teacher might be a more effective teacher than I, going the other way. But because there are different approaches, even within departments, we don't want to be too specific by saying, for example, that it will be an argumentative essay, or it will be a persuasive essay. For one thing, syllabi have been written. So what we are trying to do with the language is to say a graded writing assignment, which is not a personal narrative, of appropriate length for complex discourse. Okay? Now, I know that a personal narrative can be brilliant. And if somebody is doing a personal narrative at that point and it comes in, so be it. It won't be on the news in the evening. But we don't want to say, this is the kind of assignment that you are to generate, because I don't think that would be fair to the different approaches to teaching composition. So we're not trying to be vague there, and if there are ways that you can help us figure out how to be more concrete without being too prescriptive, we very much welcome that. We're still in the process of talking about how these papers will be collected. The Dean of Instruction will be responsible for collecting those student essays. He will, or she, will forward them to the systems office for evaluation, ensuring student and faculty confidentiality. No teacher should worry if the worst student that they are teaching's paper is pulled. The random sample should call for that, or take care of that. I know, though, if I were teaching English and somebody, the dean came to me and said, give me James Jones' paper, that's the random sample that has been pulled, I might have an anxiety attack if I knew that he or she had improved, that St. Michael and all the archangels couldn't do any better. But what I would need to be told is this is a random sample. It's not anything that's going to cause you to get an award as the best English teacher or the worst English teacher. The randomness of the sample should take care of those vague things over which we have no control. The systems office is going to have a review team composed of BCCS English faculty. The chancellor has agreed, Janine, please help me, that the lodging will be taken care of and meals. In addition, any English teacher who comes to read those papers gets a $10,000 stipend. Oh, $15,000. Okay. But anyway, and they will be trained in a session on holistic scoring rubrics at the systems office. I won't be the trainer on holistic scoring because I don't know very much about it. We would welcome any suggestions from anyone who is strong in this area. about how we can get that training, but we think it's the kind of training that can be delivered in a short period of time, and that the work could be done in maybe an afternoon before and the following day. These papers will be evaluated in the 3 categories, and we will then report that information to State Council. In the last paragraph, I may repeat again, this is a pilot year. Nothing is being carved in stone. And so I hope I haven't gone on too long, but I'm sure you've read this, and the committee members and I, and we will be sharing with the other committee members, are looking forward to your reactions and your suggestions for how we can make this process better at the same time that we can get it on time. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. I had the responsibility for chairing a group looking at technology. We're very pleased with the individuals that you all sent to join us in this particular process. Steve Cersone joined us. Leslie Smith was part of our particular group, as well as other individuals from throughout the state from our community colleges. Gene Damon from the system office supported us, as did Carol Schultz from the system office, and of course Janine Pavlidis has been our inspiration, our driving force, and keeping our nose to the grindstone, making sure we get the job done. Technology, what does that mean? Well, in 1998, the system put in place a board policy called computer competencies. And very shortly after that, the IPAC, which is the instructional group of provosts and deans from across the state from 2-year and 4-year colleges, put together a list of defined skills. In effect, they took those competencies and gave more meat to them so that we had a lot more clarity in terms of what they were about. Well, as we started looking at competencies, one of the first questions was, well, haven't we already done the job? Well, it was very clear to us that when we talk about computer competencies and technology competencies, we didn't mean the same exact thing. Technology competencies are computer competencies and so much more. Well, what more? Well, we started getting all kinds of suggestions. You talk to the Dean of Technology or Dean of Engineering at Old Dominion University, and he'll tell you that every program ought to have as part of its general education a course called Introduction to Technology. And in that, he didn't mean being able to use a computer, he meant being able to understand technological processes. He felt that that was so important in this day and age, it ought to be part of every program. Well, we weren't quite ready to go there. But we did see an area that is growing and developing and expanding, referred to as information literacy. In the computer competencies, there was a very minute section that talked about seeking out information, and that's something that you would need to do. So as we looked at these, we thought this probably needs to be dramatically expanded upon. And the individuals sitting around the table started looking at what that meant. And as a result of those examinations and those lookings, we came up with a proposal for a revision to the board policy. You have that in your package on page 19. And what you will see on that page is where we struck out some things and where we added in some things. Understand our basic premise on the traditional computer competencies portion was it's working, it's in place, leave well enough alone. What we did say is that we felt a need to expound upon the information literacy, so we, in effect, at the bottom of that page have put in a lot more about what information literacy should be about with respect to a board policy. So on page 19, you will see that proposal that we are putting forward to the change in terms of changes. And then on page 20, we took the computer skills that were spelled out and added on page 21 additional information related to how we would define the information literacy skills that are being expected. So one of the things that we want to hear very much about from you is, what do you think about those kinds of changes? Effectively, what we are talking about doing is broadening what we have already been doing. Now, so the basic part is to get the idea of the concept of what do we mean by technology competency, and that's what we're suggesting to be computer competencies and information literacy. And you will notice that the title on that proposed revision to the board policy, it was computer competencies requirements, that it now be changed to computer competencies and information literacy requirements. Some people might suggest, why do we put them together? Well, we just thought of this as an add-on and an expansion of something that's already there. And it kind of puts all the technology ideas into one area. The next part of the question is, okay, so you have those ideas. How do we want to go about assessing it? Well, that's a good question. And the task force doesn't have an answer to that yet. It has some ideas. There are a lot of states working very diligently on this whole concept of information literacy. You would have found on the table a one-page, two-sided document with all kinds of websites about what people are doing with respect to information literacy. There is one in Virginia at James Madison University where they have an actual online test that they use. And I want to show you some examples of what kinds of questions one might ask in something like that. In addition, there are numerous sections that deal with tutorials on information literacy. The question of, well, who teaches this, or how does the student learn this, is something that the task force felt should be left to the individual colleges to decide. At a workshop this spring, Gina and I saw an individual talking about this. She probably spent out 10 to 12 different strategies for how you might present information literacy. And we felt that that's something that should be left to the colleges. We as a group felt that there was a need for determining when it should be done, that some of that should be with respect to the colleges, but also that we ought to be giving some guidelines. I'll come back to that in a second. First, I want to give you some examples of these questions. Well, this is from James Madison University, and the kind of question they're asking here is, look at Leo, which is their computer system, to find out whether the following book has a bibliography of references. Gives you some information up above about it. This is something that a person would do. They can connect to Leo, they can go in and find some information, they come back and they put in an answer, yes or no. You can see how this could be computerized in terms of raising some of these questions. We've got a great computer system in this state, so we've got a vehicle for collecting the information. And one of the things that we're looking at is utilizing that system for going out and getting people to respond to some of these things. And then these were two other questions that they had. And you can again see the kind of thing that they're talking about. Efficient way to find journal articles. The red, of course, is the correct answer. It's only 30% of their people responding to this question really knew the correct answer. And also the second one talks about looking up a particular periodical. Again, you can see people have a little bit of confusion about some of these kinds of things. You can see, however, that this could relate to a multiple choice testing, a collection of questions, some critical thinking that might be involved in this, a whole variety of strategies. We saw this at least as a way to start. So one of the things that we were thinking about is that an assessment vehicle that's possible is a test that would be online, a test that is available system-wide, a test that is looking at some of these specifics that we would have a subgroup work on to generate. Again, related to the kinds of skills that you see. Setting this list of skills in place gives the roadmap for how the test should be put together. So these would be critical to us. Okay. Let me slide up on that. One of the things that we felt very strongly about was that many of our students today are coming in with computer skills, not like kind of like what happens at a lot of the universities where they expect everybody walking in the door is going to have them. But we're seeing more and more people coming with those skills. So one of the things that we said in one of our assumptions is that with respect to computer competencies, that should be looked at and dealt with within the first 12 credits. We saw that more as something people come with. Now, you know our board policy says computer competencies are something you will demonstrate by the time you finish. And we're just looking at that time frame is going to start moving forward, that people are going to need to have it in hand sooner. And it also, I think, makes the statement that our students will come in, or at some point early in their careers, have a base of knowledge about computers so that they can be used, that knowledge can be used as part of our instruction. We looked at the information literacy, and you can see some of these test results, why we looked at it that way, as an opportunity for the community colleges to do value added. That this is something we would be doing as part of all of our courses to move our students forward in terms of their understanding of how to use the wide variety of technology out there to collect information and to utilize information. And we are looking at this information literacy portion being applied to all programs of 30 credits or more, so certificates, diplomas, and degrees. And you may remember the current policy talks about 40 programs of 45 credits. So there are some fundamental changes that the task force has recommended. You know, if you want to know why, well, the task force just felt that these were important and should be out there in terms of everybody's abilities. What I want to do now, one of the things that happens is for information literacy. I'm not really quite sure what that is. What are we really talking about there? We saw a video that we want to share with you that hopefully will give you a good idea of what we're looking at, and that information literacy has this broad outreaching general education aspect to it that we felt was important to include as part of the technology. I guess I need to say one more thing before I do that. Computer competencies. Every college has in place a method for certifying that individuals have the computer competencies. We are saying that you will continue to do the same method that you have been doing in terms of certifying those computer competencies. We are not telling the colleges that you need to scrap what you've been doing for the past 2 or 3 years and put something new in place. It's worked. It's doing what it's supposed to. We are suggesting that that's information about computer competencies that we want to know internally. What we are suggesting we would be reporting to the State Council is the information about information literacy. So again, no changes in the computer competencies. Business as usual. The add-on that we're looking at is the information literacy, and this would be the part that we would be sharing with the State Council. So let me switch over this video and give you that sense, and then we'll go into some questions.
What is information literacy? You know, I'm not exactly sure.
How much you know about
Information
information?
literacy would be literacy, information,
Not just the printed word anymore.
Interact with the technology.
like the internet, and things like that.
So the ability for people to get information from different sources, whether it's
Something of an
I get
overload.
my information from the library, from the computers, from my boss.
you can get information almost any and everywhere. You can look outside at the sky and get information.
miracle of the human animal is the ability to extract highly complex information from anything our five senses can relay to our brains. Never before in human history has so much information been pushed at us. Never before in human history has so much information been available in storage, not just to the elite few, but to anyone who is able to access it. We're living in a time when the total amount of human knowledge is increasing exponentially. Information is being developed, assimilated, reshaped, and redistributed at a rate unimaginable even a generation ago. Say you were living in 1400. Well, you could probably get along pretty well in 1500 with the same information you had in 1400. Not a whole lot changed for the average Joe. But a person living in 1900 would hardly recognize anything today.
Stock is up 54% in the quarter. Stock down today as a Singapore Airlines.
Sitting up on 757 transition to the westbound side of the 91. You get traffic
Every year there are 60,000 books published in the U.S. alone.
This is big stuff.
Last year there were 6,000 pieces of new legislation. There are 2.1 million web pages. There are 7 million new web pages every day.
Anybody who has access to a computer and a connection can, have input into the great dialogue. Anybody.
Half of all service workers are involved in gathering, analyzing, synthesizing, structuring, storing, and/or retrieving information.
The amount kids have to know in school today is phenomenal.
Well, going into a library anymore isn't just going in and picking up a book. Going into a library now is the ability to go anywhere in the world with the one touch of a finger on a computer.
The Internet Archive contains collected information for historians, researchers, scholars, and at this time it contains about 14 terabytes of data. That's equal to about 1 billion pages of text. That is doubling every 6 months.
A mouse, a keyboard. If you're not using a computer, you're obsolete as a human being.
Your ability to function effectively in the 21st century is directly linked to your ability to increase your spot knowledge in wildly varied and often unanticipated areas quickly and efficiently. You must be able to find out. If you don't have the skills to find out, you will be left behind.
There's a lot of places you can go to get information, but the best place you can go is TV. I mean, you can learn about anything on TV. If you have cable, you can get like 2,000 channels.
Having skills enough to quickly access information is not enough.
You can learn all about animals, old music. You can learn about old music. You can even learn another language. They have sports and Spanish and Food Network.
This is information. Is it accurate? It has official-looking numbers. It's on television.
It had more lights on it, red.
This guy says it's real.
That's what it looked like with bronze off.
One of the attendees was a woman who says she's 400 years old and from the planet Venus. Another woman says she was instructed by her space alien brothers to undergo breast implant surgery.
Facts are information. Like the sun sets in the west, that kind of thing.
Quite frankly, the cupboard has been more than half empty.
Opinions are information. But opinions aren't necessarily facts. Neither are deceptions or rumors. But they are all information. Now, this is the tricky part. How do you know these answers are correct? What makes them correct? This little picture? Who's behind these correct answers to everything? Could be.
Anyone can put up a website and they can put any information, true or false, that they want at that site.
Let's say I had to do a report on Martin Luther King. See what I come up with. This is the kind of thing that can happen if you're researching things on the internet. Lots of different websites. Whoa. Ah, look at this graphic right here. It looks like it was put up by a real organization. It seems pretty official. It has historical writings. It's the truth about Martin Luther King. Ah, it has recommended books, which is good because I can do some further research by reading those books. But what you find here is this website is not what it seems like in the inside. Looks pretty official, but this is a white supremacist website talking about white supremacy, but you never know that just by looking at the website. That's the thing.
It's information. The question is it what you're looking for? In reality, information is information. No more, no less. It's up to you to determine if it's good or bad, relevant or irrelevant, honest or deceptive. Whether you're a student, a teacher, a priest, a biologist, car mechanic, whatever you are or hope to be, there is information being generated right now that will modify or completely change everything upon which you base your knowledge of the world. Your job, your grade, your quality of life will depend to a large part on your information literacy.
Especially the last meeting, said, can we get access to video? Yes, it's free. And what I'm going to try to do is see if they'll give me permission to copy it, so you won't all have to open it at the same time. Actually, that was made free today, but I'll ask them if I can copy it, and if you're interested in it, I'll let the LLC directors around the system know it's available.
I already have 2 copies of the G, and it is available for free, and you can copy it if you only want.
Oh, good.
According to UCLA.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Okay, what I hope to give to you is an overview of the competencies, and Jean reminded me, one thing I didn't mention is that there are 4 more competencies looming. Over the next couple of years, the State Council has asked us to look at a total of 6. The next 4 include critical thinking, oral communications, scientific reasoning, and quantitative analysis. Not really sure what the next 2 will be. There's some debate across the state on how that should come out. Our colleges, the majority of our colleges agreed that it would be best, if there is a best, it's choose your poison here, would be critical thinking and oral communications. I'm not, again, that will probably, the decision on that will probably be made in the next month. And all 6 will be listed on that website that I showed you earlier. What I'd like to do now is we have, or should have here, probably 6, maybe 7 of our sister colleges present at this meeting. Yesterday we had 10 at the meeting at Virginia Western. Eastern Shore is here. I see Jay Sargent, Paul DeCamp. Are they here? Yes. Oh, I see it back there. Rappahannock, Thomas Nelson, obviously, and Tidewater. What I'd like to do is to give Dr. Serrano's agreed to take down just some major points so that we can capture some of this on the flip chart and I can bring it back to Richmond with us. What we'd like to do is to give every college an opportunity to tell us what your major concerns are. Maybe take up to around 5 minutes to do so. A spokesperson or two could give us some of those, capture those points. After that, we'll just open it up and talk back and forth and have a dialogue. We do have some panelists up here that can also respond to some of the questions as we go through this process. I know a lot of you in here, and I know you won't be shy, so please give us your best thinking on this. Let's start with Eastern Shore.
We really, actually, you've answered some of our questions on the way down. But there are a couple of questions left. The first is the timing of when you take the essays. We weren't sure from looking at page 4. We saw that you took the sample right after the withdrawal date. But when are you going, is that the last essay of the class or the last essay they did after when you asked? And when is that? Because English teachers were a little concerned that if you ask for it too early in the semester, it's not going to gel yet. The second is just a comment. I know that people have been saying that students come with technological competencies. We just finished a study of entering students, and we found that 10% of the students could test out of the computer class. So we're not so sure the students are coming in. The other thing that I'd like to say is that we've already planned to use a graduate exit essay that's graded holistically, and we would really like to see all the English faculty trained eventually to do this, because we're going to use this, and all the colleges are going to use it, all the full-time English faculty, maybe even a couple of part-timers, might be really good if we were all across the system sitting on the same page.
That's an excellent idea. And at the fall assessment, there's going to be a session on this bringing up.
Yeah, thank you. The recommendations at the bottom of page 2 and on page 3 specify that this paper will be either the last paper or one of the last papers for the course.
Okay, we weren't sure whether it was you take the sample and then the last paper they did before that sample, or it just wasn't clear.
No, our intention is to capture this information when a student has virtually completed English 111. Yeah. Let me also mention to you very briefly, there was some confusion about the inclusion of Appendix A. And in particular, there was confusion about page 10 and 11 of Appendix A. That is not our plan or proposal. That was simply a kind of draft or a suggestion or a model that Shev had sent to us and said, you know, this is the way you might format your proposal, not this is how you should do it. And so there is a methodology, a description of assessment process that is not at all what we are suggesting.
Other comments? Jason,
Okay, Bill just wanted to speak to the issue of the scoring grid and calculations.
Can't hear.
Bill Ziegler will speak to the issue regarding the scoring grid, and Kathy Mason will speak to the issue regarding the differences in expectations for competency of transfer students versus OT students.
I'm a teacher in an occupational technical program, and on page 2 it talks about draft plans to assess and report competencies. There seems to be a little bit of conflict between section C and D. In section C it says developing writing standards, NCCI should pay particular attention to ensuring writing competence of students who intend to pursue degrees and or continue their studies at four-year institutions, while section D says students in all degree programs should be expected to demonstrate the same writing competencies. I spoke to some other program heads in occupational technical programs, and we disliked the wording intensely in section C that said that there should be particular attention to ensuring writing competence in students who intend to pursue degrees and/or continue their studies at four-year institutions. Number one, we have no idea who is going to go on to a four-year institution. For example, in the nursing program, it's an associate degree program, but many nurses go on later to get a bachelor's degree. In the second part, we would have to have different sections of English 111 for people that were going on and people that weren't going on. That is not the model. In the third part, people in occupational technical programs want the students to have the same level of writing expertise, or we wouldn't be putting them in English 111 one, well, we're putting them in some other class. So we would like to have that wording revised.
That's excellent.
Please speak for the microphone.
I think the English faculty that had input into this shared the concerns that Kathy raises from some of the occupational technical faculty about the need to include workplace-related forms of writing instead of sort of an essay-based assumption about what the writing standard should be about. I'd like to ask some questions about the development of the rubric. We've done some similar kinds of assessments, and one of the things that I think we've learned from that is that you can't always take a rubric that looks valid on its face and expect it to perform usefully when you're actually faced with real writing samples. A lot of times it turns out that an item in a rubric is hard to apply in any kind of a reliable way because it just doesn't capture something that turns out to be pretty essential about the overall quality of writing. In particular, I think this rubric is maybe a little bit short on some pretty important rhetorical aspects of writing that the impression that the writing makes on an audience as to its content, its interest, its overall effectiveness is not going to be captured in even in the totality of the items of the rubric that we see here. And then, in fact, what might need to be considered is whether the pilot shouldn't be really piloting the rubric to see how applicable it is, rather than assuming it's going to be adequate for evaluating writing. And I think that's going to be even more crucial since we have a possibility of a lot of different types of written products being part of this sample. I think we have some concerns too about this, kind of what seems to be a kind of a mismatch between some of the language in the document about the purpose of this being, I know we sort of, I think I heard kind of a disavowal of the value added, the language, but it is in the document, and also in the document is a note about these are competencies expected of graduates of community colleges. And if that is the implication, then I'm wondering what is to be interpreted by looking at written products that are produced toward the end of one English 111 semester at really an unknown point in each individual writer's educational career. We have everything from 18-year-olds from any number of high school educational backgrounds to 40-year-olds. What are the factors contributing to these levels of writing performance, and how is the interpretation of one sample going to help us to determine what value is added by English 111, or even what kinds of changes or improvements need to be made in writing instruction. And I think that's it. I think that last point was maybe a question about whether this is a formative or a summative evaluation, or a little bit of both.
Very good points. Thank you very much. And in yesterday's session in Virginia Western, similar points were made about the grid and the need to include audience in the grid. And we even have, and that we shared with the committee, first of all, an article from English Journal, which is going to be shared and duplicated. So thank you very much.
All right. Call to Cam.
Some of the comments we had about the random sample.
Can you come up?
We had some questions on the random sample or concerns. We know that as we go through the semester that some students may continue after the withdrawal date. We know that they won't be successful. And we prefer that the sample be collected based on those students in the English 111 that get a grade of C or better. Just a concern. A lot of our questions, I think, have been answered today, or we've got better insights, because we had a lot of questions on the assessment process on the computer technologies and the information literacy. Point that Eastern Shore made, we had the same concern. We are not seeing that most of our students are coming in with computer competencies. And we have a fair number that come in without that. And the way that we've been dealing with a lot of computer competencies to date has been through a 117 and requiring that in all programs. We can't get all these skills into that particular course with the students that we see coming in today. And then given that, if we add additional courses to make sure that the skills are covered, then we've got questions we've got caps on the number of credits in a program and other requirements and things increasing. Something has to give somewhere along the lines. And then I think just a general thing is that we're finding we're going to need to make a lot of changes. We mentioned writing across the curriculum. We see that we're going to need information literacy across the curriculum as well as computer technology in order to achieve these things.
Hi, my name is Tracy Elliott. I'm going to speak towards the technology and information literacy. At RCC, we see that computer competencies in many cases as our SOLs do in the K through 12s, and that 8th graders are supposed to meet the competencies that we're teaching in our IST 117 class. And we'd really like to see us be able to concentrate more on the advanced skills since we are college. And I believe that from conversations I've heard around the Commonwealth from higher ed in the four-year and doctoral institutions, they'd also like to see that as well. They feel that although, and we agree, I mean, we definitely have plenty of our students who come to us without any of these skills, we really need to do a pre-test to determine what their skills are, and then base those at a developmental or remedial level, and therefore be able to take our students who already come to us with those skills and get into the IST 117 class to fulfill what we'd like for them to be able to learn in those classes. Now, we know that trying to infuse anything throughout the curriculum is a challenge. So we hope that then there'll be a lot, within our college, a lot of collaboration between faculty and librarians in working with infusing information literacy and resource-based type of instruction in order to be able to achieve the core requirements for a particular class, rather than adding another core learning objective, actually just achieving the learning objectives of that particular course through information literacy instruction. So that's what we would also we'd like to see. At RCC, we just began to sort of document what we're doing as far as information literacy, and I have about 50 copies of our information literacy assessment form, and I'll leave that over there on the table with all the other many dead trees. So hopefully, hopefully we brought up some good points. And like you said, we also too want to say amen into incorporating into the curriculum. That it's not, information literacy isn't just a responsibility of the library or of English 111, and certainly not of just ISD 117. We'd like to see it throughout the entire curriculum. And hopefully there's somebody from our campus, our college, who would like to talk about the writing assessment. Nula or Wallace or Homer. I know Glenda has a question.
Well, I just have a question. This 5% random sample, am I to assume that the smaller colleges will be contributing fewer student papers to that? It's not weighted. It's not.
All I doubt it.
If it's a true random sample, the colleges should be represented proportionally.
No. No, then it's not written.
That's not random. Then it's weighted. Then it's weighted.
I'm saying there's an equal chance for every
Yes,
college to
that's
be in
different.
there.
That's
Oh, the probability, that's
Yes,
correct.
that's different.
Equal probability.
See, I never do the statistics.
We never had a discussion about that.
Okay, but everyone's right. Thomas Nelson.
That's right, see handout.
Good afternoon, my name is Eileen Schweitzer, I'm coordinator of Learning Resources. The group of faculty and administrators that met together had several comments both on the writing competence and the technology competence portions. I'll just allude to a few of the comments that we received, and the rest will be available on the handouts. First, we want to heartily endorse the suggestions that have been made about competencies representing the value added to a community college graduate. Ideally, the community college student should be assessed close to their graduation, either through an end-of-program assessment or a designated capstone course that is writing intensive. We feel that the selection of English 111 students, in a way, does not meet that purpose because it's typically a first semester course that has been repeated many times throughout the session. Using writing samples from that course may prove to be too early to really demonstrate the value added. Secondly, we'd like to address the issue of the purpose that will be accomplished by the results that are forwarded to Shev and to the public. What meaning will be attached to the samples that are graded from the English 111 writing samples, especially without comparing those samples to the ones that are made by the students' instructors? What meaning is going to be attached to the rating of highly competent, and less than competent? And what conclusions is the public supposed to derive from those results as they are shared publicly? The next comment we would like to share is in regard to the assessment process. I think there is some concern about these reviews taking place during the peer group meetings because that is a very busy time. We don't want to cut into the participants' activities, and we are pleased to hear that the system is committing to supporting either the reviewers staying late or arriving early, and we are heartily pleased to hear about the adequate financial compensation that will be coming to the participants in that process. And then we also want to encourage sufficient lead time so that the faculty can prepare the writing samples, make copies and so forth, and also recognize that many faculty are on different schedules, and this needs to be considered. Moving along to the technology portion, we want to express our appreciation to the task force we're moving beyond a narrow focus on computer and technology competence and broadening the base to include information literacy. I feel that's a very important adjustment. In the handouts are several comments about editorial improvements that we feel could be made. We understand that it is just a draft. But we do want to emphasize our concern on page 20, attachment H, referring to skills. There is a statement there that we feel is, could be construed as very prescriptive, and it reads, use appropriate components of an integrated productivity software package. We're not sure how to interpret that word package, and we want to make the assumption that the faculty members will have the flexibility to choose the appropriate components as defined by their curricular needs. And also we want to share the assumption that the task force recognizes that all productivity software may not be appropriate to all students, and that there needs to be some adjustments and some allowances made for that. Also, as far as the assessment process, we want to encourage that it be project-based as opposed to a particular software package focus. Thank you.
Tidewater has two presenters. Professor Chris Jennings will speak to the written communication. Professor Brenda Sedlacek will speak to the technology skills.
Good afternoon. As Dr. Dever said, I am a professor of English at Tidewater Community College, and we had a meeting of our faculty and administration this past week to review the document and have a number of responses that I'm going to share with you as a result of our discussion. Again, we're looking at the proposed standard for the writing assessment of using English 111 that was in the planned draft. And we are going to point out a number of ways that this is a flawed capstone. Given that the BCCS is concerned with institutional effectiveness, can this proposal to randomly sample 5% of program-placed students enrolled in all English 111 sections in the fall 2000 term provide colleges with individual data to view the results to improve instruction? Will results be used to draw comparisons between community colleges? Consider the long-range effect of assessment. Again, this question has been asked, what is a meaningful context for looking at the results? As Glenda asked, we were concerned also with the 5% random sampling. Isn't there an opportunity for some colleges to be left out of this testing or this assessment? The proposal is to focus on English 111's last out-of-class graded writing assessment to assess competency, as we know, in the plan at the end of the course. Again, this question's been asked several times, and we had the same question. Does a freshman English introductory course in composition represent the highest skill level of the community college student? Again, looking at the assessment of the English 111 composition, what standards will be used to determine competency? The rubric as suggested and as has been already examined is very limited, and it does not work for a variety of writing samples, as has already been pointed out. We've done a lot of work at Tidewater Community College with rubrics, working with writing samples and with other collections of work. We found that a rubric has to be changed over time, refined, and worked to meet the characteristics of various different writing assignments. Again, the question is asked, who will provide training for the evaluators? The suggestion was made that there would be one afternoon of training. That is definitely not enough training for people who are going to be writing for competency assessment. Again, looking at the levels of competency as high or competent or less than in the rubric that's suggested does not really fulfill the qualities of a rubric. A rubric, again, usually shows what are the characteristics of a highly competent paper, what are the characteristics of a less than competent composition. Onward, we've looked at the fact that the draft says these are unfunded recommendations. How will the process of reading and assessing be completed without funding? If alternative funds are expended, what current funding will be cut? In reference to the quote, the system office will form a review team composed of VCCS English faculty to score the essays. In successive year, the evaluation process will be conducted through the VCCS English peer group meetings and so on. Again, we're wondering what has happened to the concept of writing across the curriculum. Competency needs to be established by a team of external reviewers representing diverse curricula, not just the English faculty. There is a concern for measuring real writing as demonstrated in diverse curricula offered at the college. What can be a vehicle for gathering writing for the non-transfer degree student? It is understood that assessment of writing needs to be a result of writing across the curriculum representing diverse degree programs. How can the institution measure its effectiveness if the entire curriculum is not represented in the assessment tool? In regard again to the use of English 111, a first semester freshman composition course to measure institutional effectiveness, as Janine pointed out, this is an assessment for institutional effectiveness. What are the liabilities built into using writing from this introductory course for first year students? Again, consider the comparisons that might be drawn across the state of Virginia with this assessment. Will our students being graded for or being assessed as competent or non-competent be compared to students at William & Mary or ODU who are being judged at the end of their degree program? The draft plan includes the assumption that writing in courses other than English is essential, and competence in writing should be the responsibility of faculty throughout the college, not solely the responsibility of English faculty. We had an applaud for that earlier. Well, why are we solely relying on English 111 as the course, and how are we again supporting writing across the curriculum? The 6 competencies do include critical thinking and technology, or information literacy as been described today. Shouldn't writing competency also include evidence of use of sources and documentation? One of the skills on page 21 is that the information literacy would include use information effectively to accomplish a specific purpose. That sounds like composition to me. Revise the developing process and use technology to communicate the product. Again, we're getting right back to communication and writing, where these are interlinked competencies. As well as critical thinking. Is it a separate competency? Shouldn't critical thinking be considered a major component of any writing competency? Competency needs to be documented with process, product, and outcome, not outcome alone. Are we solely concerned with outcome? Well, among the 3 goals of the Commission is to identify measures to assess value added to students' knowledge and skills. In addition, Shev prefers that institutions are able to demonstrate value added by the collegiate experience. They are encouraging a value added approach. Once again, how can a single writing sample from one introductory course serve this purpose? The goal of community college and post-secondary education is to promote lifelong learning. What instrument can measure writing competency and also support this goal? The community college, as we know, is composed of a rich mixture of cultures, backgrounds, experiences, occupations, and ages. Again, how can the diversity of our student populations and of our community colleges be represented in this proposed assessment instrument? At Tidewater Community College, we value the collegiate experience. That is the experience of the college, not just on a course-by-course basis. Again, how can we support the collegiate experience and make connections between the experiences our students bring to the classroom? Well, the answer that we have is one that I've been doing a great deal of work on in the last 3 years in a grant that I've been directing for the U.S. Department of Education. And that has been the implementation of a portfolio for placement of students into our college. A portfolio, as you may know, is a collection of student work that embodies the goals and objectives of coursework. It incorporates process and product. It has a reflective element in which we can see how the students evolved in their writing and in their thinking. The portfolio model has been shown to change the instructional pattern, enabling instructors to see the effectiveness of their assignments and to alter and improve curriculum. According to Peter Elbow, a well-known educator, portfolios help evaluators recognize that any exam is untrustworthy with only one piece of writing. We have portfolios at Tidewater Community College as a model. We have them at our Visual Arts Center in Portsmouth, as well as in students who have been in a portfolio project where we've been gathering data for the last 3 years. Research on portfolios in colleges finds colleges all across the nation using portfolios for a variety of measurements. I wrote a paper in April '99 on the portfolio, and these are just a few of the colleges that were mentioned in that paper: St. John Fisher, Ohio State, University of Michigan, Miami University, University of South Carolina, University of Arizona, Syracuse, and so on. In Virginia, we have Virginia Commonwealth that requires a portfolio in the first-year composition course. George Mason uses portfolios for exemption from advanced composition. Virginia State uses portfolios in freshman writing course, and so on. More notably, Kalamazoo College in Michigan uses a senior year electronic portfolio as a graduation requirement for students to demonstrate their competencies and capabilities as they pursue internships, field-based study, or research. That might be a way of putting the two competencies we're talking about today together. Advocating portfolios goes beyond just the portfolio in the classroom, but to a greater use of portfolio, and that is the institutional portfolio. Again, I had an opportunity to meet Jeff Siebert, Director of Research, Evaluation, and Instructional Development at Johnson County Community College in Kansas. At that particular community college, they assessed their institution with the competencies of math, speaking, writing, culture and ethics, models of inquiry, and problem solving. They do not use a standardized test. General education is the responsibility of the faculty as a whole, and it is a program that is minimally intrusive to the faculty and students as they have portfolios that are created from student work in the classroom. Faculty teams, 3 to 5 members of an interdisciplinary team, use a scoring criteria to evaluate, again, work that is gathered in a random session or random sampling. And he would be a person who would be someone we may want to follow up on talking with, as he has done a number of workshops, and the one that I attended was at the New Horizons in 2000. The institutional portfolio is a way of doing assessment and including the competencies and enabling us to also refine what we are doing in our curriculum. I'd like you to consider it.
I'm just going to speak briefly to the technology issues, and several of the issues that we have already been mentioned by many of the other people here today. First of all, we felt that you definitely need to separate technology from information literacy. As it's been stated here already, if we're going to use the computer competency tests and assessments that are already in place in the college, then how are we going to report that if we're going to use that test and combine it with an information literacy assessment somehow? So we feel that they need to be totally separated. Information literacy, we think, could be put in with or rolled in with either the critical thinking, or as Christine said, even just with the writing assessments. So it's something that goes across all the different areas that we teach in, and so it can be incorporated easily into several different areas. Another concern that has already been brought up today was the timing of the assessment. It's stated in the plan that we would use introductory courses, perhaps English 111. The computer competencies are tested usually at the beginning of their college time, as well as IST 117 is a introductory class also. But yet it goes on to say that competencies should represent the skills and knowledge expected of any graduate from the institution. So once again, as has already been stated, why are we using as a tool something that they're doing at the very beginning of their career, college career, and we're going to let that reflect on the competency of the entire institution. So another question we had was on the random sample. We have several campuses, and we would want to make sure that all the campuses were represented equally. And we had one item that we thought should be added to the computer competency skill list, and that was the ability to create a chart or graph from data in a spreadsheet or table. That was just something that we feel is very important, goes across curriculum, and that should be included there. That's it.
Let me make a comment there about computer competencies. Remember, one of the things, we know these are already in place, and the issue was, do we come up with a single mechanism for collecting data that we would then put across all of the colleges? That's what the State Council wants. The way we presently do it, where we say you've completed IST 117 and you meet the competencies, the State Council would say no, we will not accept that. So what we have designed is that we will say, however we wish to say, we're doing the computer competencies, and the data we will give you at State Council will be on information literacy. We will not give you data on computer competencies. So yes, they are, we are keeping them somewhat separate. We are saying the computer competencies are important, and we're saying that's done. Don't ask us any more about it. Focus on the information literacy point and see how we do as an institution. So we're sensitive to what you're saying.
But that's not what the document says.
Right. Should we remove it then from the criteria in that area and just call it information literacy?
I think what happened was when the State Council first came out with their call for that competency, everyone reacted the same way as a computer competency. And then they took it back, and they said, no, that's not really what we meant. And I think if they had thought about it more carefully, they would have framed it information literacy. But I agree, I don't think, probably we should, as we put the plan forward to council, we should probably only focus on information literacy, and not even mention the beginning piece.
Not mention those, because the testing would be totally, the assessment would be totally different to assessing those different items.
But I'm also hearing, though, a need for that to continue, and that it's still very important to have at the beginning of a student's career with us.
Yes, they definitely need that competency, but is that something we need to be reporting to Shev? I mean, we're already
I don't think they really
assessing that.
I don't think they want it because it looks, and someone mentioned it here, too much like what is required of an 11th grader upon exit of our high schools. Even though we know that our students come to us all over the place, I don't think they wanted to put that on their public webpage and say, well, this is what you get in high school, and oh, this is also what you get in college. So I think they wanted to keep that separate.
Right. And we all already have computer competencies that we're implementing right now.
Okay, Scott?
A person who is a GED, a person who has a GED comes to the community college.
Right.
Are they expected to have those competencies?
They're expected to have them within the first 12 credits. They should.
We might add, one of the questions that surfaced was, were we talking about any 12 credits, or were we talking about college level credits? And I think what we had said, that we take that back to the task force for discussion purposes. If you look at whether or not a person is put on academic warning or on probation, the requirement really relates to college level credits. It does not include the credits one has in developmental, so we might look at that same pattern.
And what we clearly heard from your colleagues on the task force, both of them, was that we need to let students know that they should have these skills coming in. Now, we know that they're not all going to have the technology skills coming in, but that we would rather push it to that entry-level point as opposed to saying this is what you get when you graduate. We'd rather focus on information literacy.
Just a point of clarification, does the 5% random sample also apply to the technology?
No, we haven't even gotten there yet. That 5% was only for the writing for assessment.
That's what I thought, I just heard.
The only thing that we brought out for the information literacy piece was your thinking on the policy change, the fact that we are now putting in a whole new piece on information literacy and the standards. Because we can't even develop, I don't think, an assessment unless we knew what the standards were going to be. And we don't have a way to assess that yet.
The 5% figure is something that the State Council has put out there as something kind of as a trial balloon, indicating that this is something they would find acceptable.
Well, we put it out.
In terms of a random thing. Well, but they did early on, and so I think that's why some groups gravitated to that.
But that's not part of this current plan for technology.
No.
I guess I'm a little unclear because to me it looks like information literacy does not necessarily imply that a student who has that also has the technology competencies. I don't understand how you're melding them together.
If you do read the actual competencies that were set forth by the ACRL, really what they're saying is that you need to know how to use the technology to find information, to process information, and to use information. So, in other words, you still do need to know how to turn on a computer, you still need to know how to use Excel, you still need to know how a database is put together, how to put a database together. So all of that is still part of information literacy. You need to know all that stuff to be information literate.
No,
So
you
you need
don't.
the technology skills or else you cannot be information literate.
No, those are skills. Those are not, those are skills. It's different from critical thinking. Skills are things, manipulative types of things, how to do this stepwise.
You know,
That's
right, and
different
that's
from
what
critical
information literacy
thinking
is
and
as well.
literacy. That's different.
Well, I think we're arguing over the term, though, although I read what the librarians put forth, and they had different categories. Gene, if you can help me out with this. They had the skill area, then they had the can you find information area, then they had a whole other area about do you know how to take apart a computer, which is a whole nother area. I don't know the names that they use, Gene, but maybe you can help me with that.
Well, they said there are three components. One is what we talk about computer competency. Push a mouse. Make it very simple as computers, which is what we've talked about in the first thing. And they talk about technology. I can't remember the exact phrase, but what it was for those people who have to understand what they got from what we talked about. Understanding how technology works underneath, which is not something we're talking about here. And between the two is information literacy, which bridges, once you have technology competence, the ability to start to use that technology at various levels. Okay. The question I think is going to be paramount for us as we move down is what's the appropriate level of information literacy that we want to see in our students. If you look at the standards, it talks eventually about original creation and going on to research. I don't think that's necessarily, we're not expecting us to go into the lab and create a new.
And in fact, what the committee did is they looked at Bloom's taxonomy, they looked at all the skills, and they said, we have students up through the sophomore year. What are we talking about? We're not talking about developing researchers. We're talking about being able to have a knowledge base, be able to apply some of it, maybe even do some analytical, but not necessarily to go as far as what you're saying.
I was going to say, I think that what Dr. Brown is trying to say is that according to the definitions of information literacy is here, you can have information literacy but not get that from the computer. Right? That's what you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Curiosity.
Computer competency and information literacy are different, but the ACRL seems to, that's right, ACRL,
Yeah.
and they seem to assume that you have to go through the computer.
Well, yes, you do, because you need to be able to take into consideration all methods for finding information.
It's almost like the next
You
step.
can't, we saw on the video, you can't even go to the library and find a book in the library without first consulting a computer.
Do I need to make a spreadsheet to do that?
Huh?
I mean, asking that question, the example we had behind that in parentheses, it says connect to Leo. I mean, this is not rocket science. The librarians have done it for us in the computer, so the skills are really, skills or knowledge, whatever you want to call it, we're really talking about being able to critically evaluate the quality of information. That sounds more important.
And that is where the committee wanted to put its focus away, because that is what a college should do.
I think I think the people who will be charged with assessing critical thinking will thank you for the work you've done for them.
And we could use volunteers for that next class.
Because it's part of critical thinking.
The task forces went back and forth, even though they didn't meet together. They sat there thinking, gee, we would really like to do portfolios or a capstone. That would make a lot of sense, because you could then weave in critical thinking, even oral communications. There are so many of these competencies that do undergird a general education. But it's really when you sit in on a task force like that, you have 23 institutions, and you're trying to figure out how best to begin the process. It's very difficult. I will mention that the state council's been pretty good with us in giving us extra time because they understand how complex our governance is with 23, 40 campuses. Unlike going to William and Mary, for example, when we looked at their work, they use a rubric, and believe it or not, it's about identical to the one that we have in our packet. And they do holistic grading. The difference is any faculty member can come forward, or any course can come forward with its writing sample, because they have writing requirement across the curriculum. So you could get a good writing sample from history, from psychology, and frankly, that's what makes sense. But we're not there yet. We don't even have that kind of requirement in the system.
Would someone comment about why we chose to do the writing competency assessment during 111 or at the end of 111 as opposed to 112?
You see it, and I'm going to pass this to you.
I mean, because we're trying to include certificate programs, most of ours only require 111. I can understand part of the thing here, but the reality is we're not finished with our students in writing at 111. And so
I'm going to try to frame this as an explanation rather than a defense. I told my colleagues here at Thomas Nelson, I said, and let me add, by the way, that the observations and the questions that you've all raised today are ones that we've struggled with in our deliberations on the Writing Competencies Task Force. And anybody who knows Jim O'Brien can tell you that he will not let anything go by him without questioning it and coming back. Coming back after we thought we resolved an issue. Jim is not reluctant to come back and say, I've been thinking about this and I think it stinks. So we've been struggling with all of these issues. And one of the things that we've been acutely aware of course, is in part the fact that there are college transfer students who will be taking 112, but there are also occupational technical students who will be not taking 112, they might be taking 115 or some other technical writing or advanced composition or some course like that. So we wanted an opportunity to have a larger aggregation of students. As I told my colleagues here, I think that the task force the members of the task force would not claim to you that we have presented you with a Lincoln Town Car.
Absolutely.
We presented you with a Ford. A Ford Escort. But at least it's not a Pinto. So I think the issue about selecting 111 was a desire to make sure we included both transfer and occupational technical students. A number of the issues that you all have raised today lay the groundwork for much needed and very perceptive examination on the systems part of general education. And what is general education? And are we just having students punch tickets? And is it something more than that? Even not only general education with these general competencies, but also general education even within a discipline. Bringing together courses in a capstone project, for example. But the task force understood itself from the start, realistically, understood itself as operating with two constraints. First constraint was Shev wants this now. In fact, Shev really wanted it before now. The BCCS was able to secure an extension. And the second thing is, of course, that this is an unfunded mandate. And that the resources for producing something like an exit exam simply are not there within the system. We also recognize that we didn't in any way, and in any sense, feel that this was to replace or to preempt or to presume in any way on the forms of assessment that individual colleges are doing. So that TCC is to be applauded for moving in the direction of portfolio assessment at the end of a degree program. So, Ron, those were some of the issues that we as a task force were working on.
I'd like to make a general comment we're, it seems to me, squeezing the technical fields from two ends. We cut the credit requirements down to 60 by mandate. And we have some general education. I'm thinking primarily now transfers to school. Might have a weird green. We have a set of general education requirements that this four-year degree person is supposed to have. And I'm a little concerned that we are squeezing out the technical courses for somebody who wants to major in science or engineering. And we are winding up putting all of the general education requirements in the first 2 years. That leaves no time for taking calculus or physics or something like that. And I'm hearing that all this sounds like a lot of effort on the part of the faculty. This needs to, and we've got 4 more to go. So that's a concern I have.
Do you have a solution?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a solution?
Well, when I was in school, I took more than 60 credits in 2 years. I think it seems to me something has to be. I don't think you can argue that the students get the same quality degree if they're taking 4 fewer courses in 4 years. You're cutting out something. And if you're adding something else in, something else has to go.
And I think you also raised a very good observation about the whole area of transfer and whether our four-year institutions are still towing the line on their degree business. And how has that changed? I don't think we've really looked at that over the last few years. Not with all these additional requirements. Scott?
I've got a point of clarification from Ron's question, a general question about that, and some specific feedback as a member of the original Computer Competency Committee. The clarification from Ron's question was, you indicated that you were going to do this with a certificate program for the English. My reading of what I see here is it's intended for degree programs only. Is that correct? That is correct?
Program. 30 credits.
In what kind of program? Any kind of program, certificate, diploma, degree? Okay, then that eliminates my second question, which is, why would there be a discrepancy between what I read as degree for English and certificate, diploma, and degree for technical?
And yesterday, that question didn't come up. There were some in the audience that would argue for only, I guess, argue away from the 30 credit. That's
The wording that I see in the assumption says degree programs. You might want to clarify that language, because you know what it means degree programs. Yeah, the 30 is in the technology, but it's not in the English. It says degree programs. So you need to clarify that language. That eliminates my second question. My third piece of information is feedback from the original computer competency group. We struggled for 9 months with that 45 credits. The reason for that was that people were very concerned about adding extra courses, because that's the way most people meet the computer competencies, is by inserting a course in whatever program it happens to be, and they didn't want to have to do that with either certificates or, heaven forbid, career studies certificates, because there just wasn't room to put it in there. And most people are still meeting, as my understanding is, most people are still meeting the computer competency requirement either by ISD 114, 117, or some combination of some other IST courses and/or an orientation course. And what your change in language will require in the policy statement is inserting more courses in most of your certificates.
And I think the committee's going to think about that after.
The committee discussed that and was consciously, we talked about that. They were consciously saying that they felt certificate and diploma people needed to have those computer competencies. And of course, along with that, knew the consequences of that. So
Yeah, our original
we'll
group
go
was
back and re-examine it.
our original group was split on that, and you see how we came out. And that's the reason we did what we did. The other thing I would say is just the language. I don't have any qualms about the information literacy and the direction you're going with that. I'm just concerned about changing the policy statement from 45 down to 30, essentially.
There were a couple deans yesterday that were questioning.
Then one last little technical point in the actual language that you have in the policy change. You use the word certificate rather than 30 credits. And technically speaking, one could construe a career studies certificate to be a certificate, and you really don't mean that.
John?
I wanted to respond to my friend and colleague, Tom Long, and I respond as the driver of a Taurus. I do believe a Lincoln Town Car is beyond our means at this point, but I'm not for sure we have to settle for the Escort, and I think we are settling for the Escort here. I think we are potentially missing a real opportunity here. These mandates come down, and they're more and more are going to be coming down on us because accountability and what I call anxiety is out there about is something happening to our students. We will satisfy those. We'll find some way of doing it. But we go through and we thrash and we do lots and lots of effort is going to be put into this. The real question is, are we going to get some benefit out of it for ourselves that we can take ownership of and feel pride in? And I'm not for sure, particularly on the writing competency, and I had Tom and John, the tables are kind of switched here. I'm usually the pragmatist and you all are the idealists. Here, you all are being pragmatic. I respect that. I know what you're up against, what we're up against. But I would argue a little bit more idealistically here, as Chris put forth in her remarks. It can be done. It can be done if we have the will to do it, to do a truly meaningful assessment of our students and of our graduates who have gone through our general education experience and have been certified as graduates receiving degrees. On this, if I understand correctly, Scott, not our internal requirements, but the requirements of Shev, as I read them, were for graduate, and I think the word was in there, degree graduates. They're really looking for people who have completed degrees. Now, we internally, on computer competency or information literacy, can say we expect it of the students who complete these other programs. But what Shev is after, and what the Blue Ribbon Commission was after, as I understand it, is degrees. People who have completed a significant amount of education. And what occurred in that. And I know from many experiences that writing is not just simply learned in English 111. And we all know that. And the English faculty know it better than anyone in that regard. It's what happens across the curriculum that occurs. And a student who is completed, to think that we're going to be out there on this public website. Now this is the anxiety part of it. We're going to be out there on this public website with people who, when they're going to say writing a written communication, how many are competent? And we're going to be out there against people who've been through 4 years and are going to be assessed at the end of that, and we're going to be taking people who are entering and have had maybe only this one course and are now basing it on that. I think we're setting ourselves up for something that is going to not serve us very well, and two, something that's going to be hard for us to take ownership of and really care about. I believe, if not this year, I would hope our group would go back to the drawing board and say, for the year after that, could we find something that we could take greater ownership of and that would truly represent the collegiate experience for our students?
May I respond? John Dever is a good friend of mine and a colleague for many years, and I was just thinking of the irony of the switch positions, and your eloquence was only matched by Tom's. And the committee has really struggled with this.
John, if I see far, it's because I have stood on the shoulders of a giant.
The committee has had to struggle with the ideal versus the pragmatic. And I am about as idealistic as anybody can get, and have found this forcing me into a much more pragmatic position than I'm comfortable with. You heard the words over and over, pilot, the first year, we must get this better. The line I kept using with the committee was, at my back, I always hear at times winged chariot hurrying near. Often we had to move along because of just the time frame constraints. I'm sorry that we have this time frame. I do believe that this, do we have a what is it?
No, God, no.
Our four, which can be made into a much better car. And there's no one on the committee who doesn't realize that. And the comments that you all have made today have been comments that have been wrestled with the committee. And at least, as we have to struggle with the pragmatism of it, we're beginning to have some conversations that I think can lead down the road to some real improvements in what we're doing as educators. And so hopefully this pragmatically driven engine is going to let us spend more time on the ideas of the future than we can do now.
Thank you. If you think about, this is where I've lost a little sleep actually. Most of this stuff doesn't bother me, but when I started to think about the ones looming on the horizon, the other competencies, and thinking that I was hoping people would finally say, we need to look at general education. I didn't think our task forces should be the ones that would stand in front of a big group and say, this is a call for the system to look at general ed. But I'm really pleased that yesterday and today, and hopefully again we'll hear that, because to me that's what's needed. And when I worked at Northern Virginia, my colleagues there said the same thing. They'd said that, what happened to writing across the curriculum? We did that a while ago and then it just went away. And my colleagues in business would lament that some of the writing abilities of the students were declining and they wondered why. So I hear you, and I know that everyone here hears you on that. And I think that there's an opportunity. I just don't know exactly how it all fits together yet. But when you put critical thinking in and perhaps oral communications, I would hate to see 6 different ways of assessing a student. They don't need any more than what they're already doing. And frankly, we do need to look at it more holistically. We haven't had the opportunity to do that. I think we're going to have to do that. But we have to give them something and get things moving. And this was one way to do it, is to present it this way. We're close to 4, but we can take some more comments from the panel or questions from the audience.
We obviously are trying to satisfy a mandate from Shev. And this may be something that can kick us off the porch to start thinking about these kinds of things. It seems to me that ultimately our credibility as a system of the state in this, and I want to second a lot of the comments that John made a moment ago. I've worked in one of those quote unquote capstone institutions that states are very proud of and that kind of thing. And the ones that take students who actually prepare for college in the first place. And the last almost 20 years I've spent working in institutions like Eastern Shore Community College. And we provide a tremendous service to people of Virginia. And not just select few, 5 or 10% of the top of the state of Virginia. And we have an opportunity through this whole process of looking at these 6 areas that Shev has said we now have to report to them to prove our viability and our value to the people of Virginia. And I think if we don't do that, if we don't go beyond the minimal kinds of things that we have approved to Shev, support Shev, I agree with John, we're going to miss a tremendous opportunity. And I do believe that if, in fact, we go beyond that, the people of Virginia will begin to see our value as a system, and our support will get very, very greater and greater. I think that's where we ought to be thinking about, not just in the short term of the next 2 years. I know how you get focused on those things because you've got projects that you've got to get done. But I think we have to think beyond the immediate projects. That's what I hope as we go through this piloting process, that we find better ways to show what we can do and what we're doing day in and day out with the people who come to us.
Thank you.
Part of the difficulty for me, personally, as lots of communities, is trying to separate out writing competency from information competency, from critical thinking competency. It just doesn't seem to be something that is practical, useful, or even beneficial to us. I strongly agree with you. I strongly agree with you. I have yet to ask why we